Ladies and gentlemen, the Newton Nomadic Theater presents Story Slap.
Just a little follow-on to that last story. 15 years ago, I myself went to China, adopted my daughter, who's now 16 years old, and doing fabulously. But that's not what I'm going to talk about today. I want to talk about a hitchhiking story, because back in 1976, if you were young, 20 years old, and a guy, one of the things you might want to do on your bucket list was to travel cross country. Not in the family station wagon, all comfy and everything, usually in a crappy car or hitchhiking. And I managed to do both of those things in the same trip. My buddy had found an opportunity to have a job at Rolling Stone in San Francisco. So he was going out there, and I had managed to find a job working at a factory in Perry, Oklahoma. So our plan was he was going to drive me out to Perry, continue on to San Francisco, and then I was going to hitchhike out there at the end of the summer when I was loaded with cash, and then we would travel back across the country together and have a great time. So we started off in our crappy car, and the very first day, the car broke down right in the middle of Pennsylvania. I remember it was rainy as hell, walking up to these strange people's houses. They looked like people from the cast of Deliverance, the movie. It was a little bit frightening, I gotta say. But like a day later, we got the whole thing worked out. We continued on to Perry, and I worked there in this factory the whole summer. And that was like being in another world. I mean, it's a little bit boring, I gotta say, but the people were incredibly nice. And the people that I worked with in this factory, they took me under their wing, and they taught me how to chew tobacco and how to fish, and one guy taught me how to paint. And then I learned to mill using a milling machine and to weld. And of course, they asked me what the plan was for the rest of my summer. I said, well, I'm going to hitchhike out to San Francisco to meet my buddy. And they were like, you really think that's a good idea? Do you read the papers, man? Did you hear what happened? They're telling me all about these serial killers and stuff like that. And are you going to be armed or anything? And so eventually they convinced me to weld a little knife, you know. My own little knife. So towards the end of the summer, I get dropped off before sunrise on this lonely road out in the middle of Oklahoma. And I remember it vividly. It was dark, and I was the only person out there. And in the distance to the east, I could see clearly cloud-to-ground lightning. I couldn't hear it because it was so far away, but it was sort of foreshadowing things to come. And I began to realize maybe this was not the best idea I've ever come up with. But I was there, and so out goes the thumb, and very quickly I get a ride, and I'm like, okay, this is working out well. So it happens to be two guys who'd been out playing pool all night and drinking beer. Just the guys you want to be your chauffeur. So I get in the car, and about 20 minutes down the road, the heads start bobbing. And so my speech pattern started to go something like this. Can I tell you about my brother Bill? Their heads would pop up, and they would swerve back into the lane. My sister Deb! And then they would kind of, so eventually I got to the place where they could let me off, and so I was excited. I'd made the first leg. I don't know what happened to those guys. It was very kind of them to pick me up. So then, by now it's daylight out, so I'm like, okay, this will be better. So I hitchhiking again, and this guy pulls over, and it's a middle-aged guy, and I get in, he's very, kind of a little bit overly friendly, I might say. And we start talking. He says, hey, you want to see some pictures? I said, no, I don't know. He goes, take a look at these pictures. And he holds me this kind of tattered manila envelope, and so I felt obliged, you know, to look at these pictures. And these were not pictures you want to see. And so we had felt obliged to tell me his nickname, which was apparently Supercock. And he told me he could perform certain services for me, which I will paraphrase as a slow bob. He said he gave the best slow bobs. So I said, no, I don't want that, and could you please let me out over there? So I get out, and I'm in the middle of Oklahoma, and I'm roasting. Semis are flying by, and breathing exhaust. An hour later, I'm still in the same spot, and I'm going nowhere, and I've got to go all the way to California. My plan was to go to Oklahoma City and make a right. That was the extent of my plan. So I'm there, and finally a car pulls over, and I go running up to it. I'm all grateful, and I open the door, and it's Supercock again. And I said, Mr. Cock, do we really want to do this? And he call me Soup. So I said, you know, and I don't know about this. He goes, I'll just drive you to a better place. So he actually did. He just drove me on to a better place, a little bit further down the road. And from then, it all went swimmingly. I got a ride from a guy who had a CB radio. Anybody remember CB radios back in the day? So he gets on there and he goes, is anybody going to California? I got a guy who's some idiot hitchhiking to California. Can you give him a ride? So at the next rest area, this guy picks me up, and he took me basically the rest of the way. And about in the middle of the night, he decided he was too tired to drive, so he let me drive his stick shift. I had never driven one, but we were in the middle of the Mojave Desert. What could possibly happen? So he got me up to speed, and off I went. And next thing we know, we got to L.A. I went to Disneyland, which was one of my destinations. And then I had to decide whether I wanted to hitchhike up to San Francisco from there, and this is where the wisdom comes in. I said no. I do not want to do this again. And I took the plane up, and I saw my friend, and we had a great trip across country. Thank you for listening.